Yes, so you'll see some of the same slides that you saw yesterday, mainly to set up the story and refresh your memory of where I was talking with this stuff. But you'll see a lot more, and the story behind the pictures is probably more interesting, or at least I hope so, relative to some of the pictures. But kind of to reiterate the three types of relationships and that balance that we're going with, where we want to not necessarily have our corn plants be the ones that give only and don't receive. We want to balance that out and have it kind of that almost a codependent type of relationship. They need us, we need them, and so we want it that way. So we want to get to this state of taking care of the corn plants in a much better way than we traditionally have. Traditionally, we've thrown things out there, we've thrown seed out there. Maybe we go out and we spray herbicides. Maybe we go out and side dress. But we never really listen to what the crop is asking for. We never go out and check on it. As by and large, I'm talking in generalities of the Midwest. You guys may be well ahead out here in California relative to where we're at. But by and large, people are not listening to the crop in the season. So you can only do that by seeing your shadow out in the field. And as we go forward, we'll start doing more tissue sampling, things like that, to know what it's feeling, since it can't actually communicate. So if you're wondering where Sheffield, Illinois is, this is kind of where it's at. You can see Chicago up there in this area. The Quad Cities is, and Monty's farm is about here, so it's not a very long drive in a tractor. It's about 45 minutes to an hour to go do a strip till last spring. So had a good time that day, navigating some 20-year, 30-year no-till conditions, and it was almost, he said it was almost painful to see a shank going in the ground in some of those fields because it had been no-till for so long, and the soil structure was amazing in that no-till. But we did it anyway, and we'll talk a little bit about what came about of those trials as we go further, but give you an idea. And most of you think Illinois, you think of flatlands, you know, you need an end-gate seeder and a disc and you get 200 bushel corn. And that is true about there. South of that line, I can see the good ground, I just don't get to farm it. So things are not always perfect in the world of Matt. We have rocks. So I'm at the end of a glacier. The last glacier that came through, I'm at the end of it. So you know what happens there. All the stuff is dropped. You have rivers and river valleys from all the runoff, and you have sand next to it from where it blew out of there. So I get to farm near central Illinois, but I get to experience some of the other things. So not everything goes as planned. Buying an old excavator to take trees out of ditches and stuff like that is really fun. It's really awesome until you hit quicksand. And an old excavator doesn't have enough horsepower, hydraulic capacity, to track and pull itself at the same time. So on a Saturday night, we got to get it out because it was going to rain that night. Not everything goes as planned. So that field in the background was planted. We had snow. It's not really what you want the first drink of water to be on freshly planted corn. So you learn to adapt. You learn, you know, actually when the field was planted, it was almost perfect conditions. Knew there was a rain coming in a few days, didn't realize it was going to be snow or amount to accumulating snow, but it did. This year was a bearcat. That's the easiest way to put it. For those of you that watch the news and hear everybody complaining about 2019, I hope it was better for you than it was for me. Those were fields of mine in late May, none of which had been planted, most of which I hadn't actually crossed yet. So this was one that showed up online, and the area between those two green lines, now red lines, is part of my field. The guy had posted it. He flew over the area. He's like, oh, God, it's horrible there. So I took the picture down. I drew those lines. I was like, yep, that's me. So a lot of water in late May. I'm on Twitter, and occasionally I'll post an opinion. Everybody's got one. Not everybody needs to share theirs, including myself. But I asked people as we crossed through May, this was when May 24th, I said, we have to decide. We're upcoming on June 5th, which is the prevent plant date for insurance. Okay, you have to decide, can you roll the dice and grow a crop and make more money than taking prevent plant insurance without completely speculating that corn's going to go to $5? And a lot of people decided to roll the dice. A lot of people are in different positions too. So depending on your farming practices, it's just like building NASCAR cars or any kind of hot rod. Everybody's got a different formula to get to where their perfect is. Some people use ammonia out front for nitrogen source. God bless them. Have a nice day. It works for some people. Fortunately, with the way I farm and what you'll see, I have basically zero inputs other than phosphorus and potassium, which I said yesterday are immobile. That's all I've got out in the field. So at the point in which this was typed on May 24th with 20 inches of rain in May, I could walk away and not have a lot of expenses and just punt for the next year. My P and my K that I put in the soil in the fall will be there for 2020. I just wouldn't use them in 2019. So it was a question everybody had to answer, and it was one that a lot of people struggled with. That was the sitting. I couldn't plant corn in May, so I built a deck on the house. Honestly, the high school friend and I to build a deck. We were like, we're not going to plant for a few weeks. Might as well do something. This guy is a neighbor. My recommendation to everyone: when you're in a hole, stop digging. He got stuck at 11 o'clock in the morning. At 7 o'clock that night, they got him out after unhooking the planter and pulling each one of them out with an excavator. I'm pretty sure planters are not meant to be pulled out with an excavator. And it probably cost him a lot of money to get it out. The bottom right, the picture I've got there is me going down the road with a side dress bar to side dress what little corn I got planted in May, while the guy next to me was planting corn in the middle of June. Now keep in mind, we're racing against Jack Frost. We come to the middle of October, there's a real good chance we're going to have a killing frost. So if you think about corn taking 110 to 120 days to mature, June 10th to October 10th, that's the 120. You're right up against that window of whether or not you're going to make that corn. The corn that he planted that day actually did get frost killed. He still harvested it. He harvested it in mid-December. I'm guessing it was probably in the mid-30s% moisture. So he got to go out there in December in 25, 30 degree weather, maybe 40 at best, dry 20 points out of the corn after he harvested it in the mud. So I was very happy that this became me. So everybody's talking about cover crops in the conference. Up until this summer, I was not a cover crop farmer. Now with Prevent Plant on 55% of my farm this year. So over half of my farm did not get planted this year because of water. I became a cover crop farmer. I had to go out and spray the fields that didn't get planted, and then I went out. You can see I planted the end rows in some of the field where I'm at right there. Spreading wheat is my cover crop. What I did was I took and planted wheat where I'm going to plant beans in 2020. I actually got treated soybeans that got returned and didn't get planted this year. Got those at a huge discount from a seed company. Spread those where I'm going to plant corn for next year. Corn likes to follow beans. Beans historically haven't minded following wheat, so I wanted to set up the rotation as much as possible for the future. But enough about 2019. It is part of the past, thankfully. We learned a lot about our things. We learned humility, and that you don't necessarily get a chance to do everything you want to do. So you better be ready, and you better have a plan B. So how do we get to this? This was one of my few fields that actually got planted this year. I had 120 acres of corn that got planted in May. I planted another about 270 June 3rd and 4th. It rained the night of the 4th. I was done. Planted some beans a week later, but that was it. So how do we set up these kind of fields to do it as efficiently as possible? I said yesterday I farmed 2,300 acres, and I do it by and large by myself. I've got some help from retired farmers in the fall to run grain carts and semis. Aside from that, I'm a one-man wolf pack. So how do we get to where we can do things by ourselves? Because in the past, I had a lot of operations that I had to do, but I also had another retired farmer next door. I had dad, things like that to run equipment and do things. And I knew going forward, they weren't getting younger. And my help was going to get to the age that they couldn't physically do anything. So I had to learn how to do things with fewer man hours and hopefully with less capital investment. The great thing about $5 corn, $6 corn that we had a few years ago is that it gave you a license to fail. It gave you the ability to try something, screw up, and not really hurt that much. So I took advantage of that opportunity and tried to figure out how to grow the best 350 corn that I could because I had 5 and 6 to play. So I want to keep everything simple, and this is what my aha moment at one point in time. I get really bored really easy. I have like adult onset ADD. I mean, it's like, squirrel, where? I want to figure out how to do things more efficiently. I want to not have to do things that I don't have to do. Tillage is one of those things. By and large, we can do as much damage with tillage as we can good things. There are instances where we need to. If we've got ruts in the field, aka 2019, if we've got compaction from whatever, tillage isn't a bad thing to get that fixed very quickly. Yes, we can use cover crops to do it over a longer period of time, but sometimes we've got to get things done fairly quickly, and then try not to screw it up again, and it will heal itself over time. So a lot of the tillage that we were doing, we were going out and chisel plowing corn stalks. Then we would put ammonia on in the fall. We'd spread our P and K. And then in the spring, Dad would go out and run the soil finisher across it to level it off, work all that stuff in. I'd plant, we'd spray, side dress, spray again. All these operations, and we were making money because corn was valuable at the time, but I knew that it wasn't sustainable long term. I mean, if we can get away without doing some of these things, if we can combine some of those applications together, can we make it better? Also, if you look at the equipment involved in this, it's a lot of capital. I had a couple $100,000, $240,000, 120-foot sprayer. Awesome, I could get stuff done. Depreciation and maintenance, it's costing you a lot of money per year. So is something that we can very well afford, but is it something we need? So everything was on the table. If I knew at this point, and I was working for Monsanto and subsequently 360 YieldCenter during this time period, and my goal was to go back to the farm. Well, I had to get the finances in a position to support me fully instead of having the two-job thing. I was okay taking a pay cut. I didn't want to take that big of a pay cut. I wasn't bringing much in off the farm. I was building it. So my goal is to take corn stalks, so my freshly harvested corn stalks, and get a perfect stand of corn out there the next year that's in a lot of ways better off than what I could be if I was out there doing full width tillage. And the other thing to keep in mind is this corn here on the left, that field, if you dig down 18 inches, it isn't clay, it isn't some illustrious subsoil that you desire that holds water. It's beach sand. So I want to conserve as much of that organic material into the soil, the root systems especially, creating pores, and try to build on the soil rather than mine it out. So the first thing you got to do is look at where you are in relation to what the crop needs when the crop needs it. If we're going to feed the crop and if we're going to listen to the crop, we have to kind of know exactly where we are at, what stages of the crop matter. So obviously stand establishment is one of them, and this has been preached over the past 20 years with the advent of precision planting, which has brought about the improvement of every planter out there, whether or not you put precision stuff on it or whether you do an OEM type of planter. they're all better because someone said we can make a better planter. So we're getting very good at placing the seed where it is. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the tillage that we did in the past was to prepare a seed bed so that the unable or incapable planters could plant that seed as good as possible. You needed to have a manicured soil in order to get a seed 2 inches deep all the time. Now we have a much more technology on the planter. We can put seed 2 inches deep into corn stalks without a problem. We got to deal with some other things if we do that, but we need to take a look at what the issues are we face now. So our planters have overcome a lot of the need for tillage based on their abilities to place seed where we need it anyway. The other thing after stand establishment, if you think about it, if you don't have them all come up within 12 to 24 hours of one another, the late emergers are weeds. Just write them off. Don't count them in your stand counts. You've got to have them all come up at the same time. If you go out there and do a flag test and mark plants as they come up, go out there in the morning, put one color of flag next to the ones that come up that morning. Go out there at night, put a flag next to the new ones. The next day. And if you go back and you find those ears that are associated with those different emergence times, the ones that came up first have the best ears on them. To the tune of those are 300 bushel ears versus 150 bushel ears. So it can make a huge difference to get them up at the same time. So we have to stack the deck. I don't want to plant in June again, but one of the things that most Midwestern farmers learned this year, or at least if they were looking learned, is that they planted in June in warm conditions. Every one of those fields came up even as a table. I mean, they were just picket fence after picket fence. It was because the soil was warm and they got away with things that they normally wouldn't have gotten away with in April when the soil was 48 degrees. So you can plant in 48 degrees, but you've got to make sure some things are in place to make sure that soil is woken up and that plant can be sustained at that point in time. So we got emergence. We can do things with planters and with fertility. We've got early stages of growth. We want to make sure that as that corn is basically from V4 on, so at V4 it starts living off of the roots of the nodal roots that come out. Before that, it's getting all of its energy for the most part out of the seed. Once it starts living off the soil, we want to make sure that we're giving it everything that it needs right there. Because as I said yesterday, when that corn is only this tall, the roots are only this deep. It's only as wide as it is canopy and probably not quite as deep as it is tall. So it's not a very big coffee cup that plant's sitting in. Make sure it's got the groceries right there by it rather than relying on it to scavenge. So after that, we've got basically grain fill. Once we've determined the ear, it's our job to maintain those kernels and not abort them, and then fill them appropriately as we go through time. So those are my 3 stages that I kind of focus on. And if you look at the uptake curves that come out of a lot of universities, they all look like this. They're all this uptake curve where small plants have less stuff, need less stuff than big plants. It's not rocket science. I mean, the fact that it takes more nitrogen later in the season than it does early. Okay, I believe you. It's a bigger plant. It needs more stuff. There's more stuff to build. The big thing is probably that we need to pay attention to is what kind of fertilizer are we putting on, or what element, and what are the properties of that element. And can we use the properties of the element that we're working with, say phosphorus is immobile, can we use that immobility to our advantage instead of our disadvantage? If we spread it on top, scratch it in, it's not mobile, it's going to be in the top couple of inches, we're not going to be as efficient with it. But we can use that immobility to our advantage by putting it exactly where we want it to be in July and knowing that the roots are going to grow right down into it. So we can turn the tables in a lot of these things. We can use the mobility of nitrogen. Rain is going to move it down. Okay, let's put it above where it needs to be and let rain move it into the root zone. So this is the home ranch, organic matter there on the left, at a whopping, half to 2-3% organic matter on that farm, where it's red and yellow. Like I said, a lot of sand out there. Cation exchange capacity on the right, we're looking at a lot of 6 to 8s wherever it's red. So anybody can farm the green. That's Central Illinois. That's how close I am to Central Illinois, the southern part of the home farm. Unfortunately, most of my fields are north. But this is a lot of what we're dealing with, is this variability that lies within fields. Historically, if I look at my yield history on insurance for this field, before I started spoon feeding, we were trying to preload everything. And like I said yesterday, 175 was as good as we could get on the field averages. Just couldn't do it. I mean, if you've got a CEC of 6, guess what? You're not going to hold 180 pounds of nitrogen. 120 of it's going to go the way of the dodo. So if I look at the nutrients I need, so here's where a lot of people need to focus. So this is just a free app, Ag PhD's app for nutrient removal. I use things that are free whenever possible. There's lots of them. They're all good. This is the one I have. Not telling you Brian and Darren are great. Good guys. I use their app. It depends, like I said, what product we're looking at. So I've got 200 bushel corn up here. You hear a lot of people talk about growing 200 bushel corn. To me, 200 is a crop failure. I'm more interested in 275. I'm trying to elevate the bar a little bit more every year, and my best year out has been 284 farm average. Last year we were less because I planted the sand hills in June. So obviously it didn't work out as well. I planted insurance corn. I knew the day I planted it that I wasn't going to beat the APH of the field because the green part of the yield map was underwater. So I was mining my insurance policy that day. So my farm average didn't do as well. The fields that were good were 240 to 260. So they were good. They weren't great. But if I look at this and I look at the properties of the products that I'm using, if I have phosphorus, potassium, if I look at zinc, those are immobile in the soil. You're not going to move them. So I need to make sure they are where they need to be, however that may be. So phosphorus and potassium, I can use different forms of sulfur, elemental sulfur, for example. It takes 6 months, 8 months, a long time to break down. So if I put that in my strip in November, come July, I've got a slow release sulfur source after the soil warms up and it starts to break down. Whereas if I'm using AMS, if I'm using ammonium thiosulfate, liquid forms like that, they're very mobile already, they're already sulfate, they're going to flush through the soil. So I can't put those on ahead of time, but I can use weather to move them in. But phosphorus, potassium, if I look at things like nitrogen, sulfur, boron, very mobile nutrients, I'm not going to be able to preload those. I'm going to have to spoon feed them. And I'm going to have to put them right where I need them to be. So I'm building my program to kind of mimic what the properties are of the fertilizer and then using timing and placement. I said this was the exact opposite of what we needed to do. P&K, putting on the surface and scratching in, or even running a chisel plow through. Say you till the ground a foot deep. You're only incorporating roughly half that deep if we go back to our herbicide incorporation. We're putting our P&K in the top 6 inches. When it gets dry in rain-fed soils, is there moisture in the top 6 inches? No, it's all down here. And those are all diffusion type materials, so they have to be in water to move. High concentration to low concentration through water. So we'll see potassium deficiencies on really high test soils because it's in dry ground. So I want to put that down deeper, place it as deep as I can to where the roots grow into it when there's moisture in July and August. That way, when I'm filling grain, I have what I need. And nitrogen, just like any of the other mobile nutrients, you got to put it there. You can use ammonia in the Midwest on a high CE soil and use the time that it takes to convert over to nitrate to your advantage. But as you know, there's a risk involved in that. By the time you account for a nitrogen stabilizer and the application pass, it's no more expensive or no cheaper than any of the other forms. So there's more risk, but not any rewards per se. I used to try to feed the soil. I used to try to build the soil test up and thereby have it available for the plant. This was the first year I strip tilled, and it's a bit difficult to see. I can talk you through it and you'll see exactly what I meant. But this on the left is the prescription for that field that went through the strip till bar for phosphorus. We were going from an area, the gray areas needed 0. They needed 0 for 4 years, was what it called for. So the soil test in those areas, I looked one day just to see what they were. They were in the 60s to 90s, P1. There's plenty of phosphorus there. We needed a 2-year spread of 170 pounds of DAP, diammonium phosphate. Two-year application of 170 pounds, which means it wasn't really needing a lot either. The average on this farm is probably 40s. We're doing pretty well. So I turned it on in an area that a lot of people would say is good enough. And you can see a line right across here where you can see exactly where that air cart turned on. That told me one thing. 1, it works to put it where it needs to be. 2, it means even though the soil test is pretty good, doesn't mean it's available and going to be ready for the plant when I want it to be ready for the plant. So it told me right then and there, I said, okay, I'm done building the soil. I'm going to know where the soil's at, and I'm going to feed the plant, and I'm going to use soil tests to monitor whether or not my theory is correct. If I put on what the plant's going to remove in grain, the soil test should be a net neutral because the plant is recycled back into the soil. So I should stay even-ish on P and K and a lot of the other nutrients that aren't mobile if I just put builds in or put maintenance in. The other thing about it, I'm a bit of a math nerd. Well, not a math nerd. I'm a nerd. I'm not great at math. But I can do this one. You always remember the little mnemonics of SOHCAHTOA back in geometry in school, in high school, at least I did. And someone always asked me, okay, if it works to put nitrogen right in the middle of that row. The corn will get to it. And I said, okay, 1, there's more roots where the corn root ball is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called the root ball. By definition, there's a lot of roots in that ball. That's why they call that. Stereotypes exist for a reason. The other thing is, if corn plants grow at a natural 35-degree angle, if they're unimpeded, your nitrogen has to move down to where those roots intercept in the middle of that row. So if you put it 2 inches down with a coulter running down between 30-inch rows, you actually have to get 10 inches deep in the ground before root meets nitrogen. Harry meets Sally at 10 inches into the ground. So that's why there's a time lag in side dress coulter nitrogen having a response to corn. It takes you a week or 2 before that really kicks in, versus if you put it right at the row, you get like 2-day response once you get a rain. It takes a little longer for those roots to find it out, because corn is not smart. It doesn't have a brain. People say it seeks out nitrogen. No, it just grows, and then it runs into something. It's a blind pig, runs into something, and all of a sudden it grows better. So it doesn't say, there's nitrogen over there, I'm going to grow to it. It just happens upon it. So you're relying upon random chance. And if it's wet, when I put this nitrogen in here and I create a slot right there, that nitrogen can't move down to 10 inches very quickly, or it takes more water to do it. So compaction makes a difference at that. So there's a few things that if we think about, and none of them are groundbreaking, none of this is rocket science. It's just thinking it through a little bit more. 63% of nitrogen uptake is taken up in the root ball within 6 inches of the plant. Okay, if most of it's taken up there, why can't I put all of my nitrogen in the root zone? And so I've adopted this in my flower pot technique of taking all these immobile nutrients, phosphorus, potassium, part of my sulfur and zinc, and I'm putting them down here in the bottom of the flower pot. They're not moving. They're not going anywhere. And then I take my stuff that I normally would have put down deep, I put it up here in the top, and let Mother Nature bring it down into the root zone. So if these plants are 30 inches apart and I'm doing a 12-inch flower pot, there's 18 inches of row middle that I'm not really concerned about. You know, that soil can naturally break down all that residue. It'll be fine. I'm not going to disturb it. It's essentially fallow in the row middles. So how do I do it? With the strip till bar. A lot of this goes on out west. It's starting to gain a little popularity in the I states, but it's not quite as cool as running a big disc ripper and four-wheel drive and, you know, all that kind of stuff. People like to drive big things. The other caveat with this is you are laying out the field for next year. Where I strip is where I'm planting. So it's got to be a planter quality operator running the strip till bar. And so that means that I might have to get out of the combine and jump into this and have somebody else run the combine, which isn't as cool on the cool scale. You know, running the combine is way cooler. But there's days where I've said, hey, Brent, get in there, run that. I'm going to go do some strips. It's just, if it pays, if it's advantageous enough, you'll find a way to do it. People say it's not scalable. It's scalable, you just got to want to try. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to feed those components, feed those times, using the properties of the crop and of the components or the products that I'm using. So I want to make sure that this little corn plant that's sitting in a coffee cup, I got to make sure it's got everything it needs, because it doesn't have a lot of roots. There's the radical and the nodal roots will come out in a couple, 3 weeks after it comes up, but until then it's living off of not much. So make sure it's got what it needs. A lot of people are going towards biologicals, humics and fulvics and sugars in the seed trench in order to kind of wake up the mycorrhizae and stimulate that growth. Works great as long as it's warm. If it's cold, you're not going to wake things up that don't want to get out of bed. So you might have to put some actual pounds in there as well. It requires the planter to be more than a planter. So this is as many places without towing a cart as I could put tanks without breaking the frame the first day. And there's days when I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. So may not want to be the next purchaser of that planter. It might have a little stress on it. But so what I'm doing, so I do in furrow. So this next year it's going to be some 624-6, some zinc, some sugar, and humic and fulvic in the furrow. Basically that's going to give some pounds, give some stimulation to the soil microbes to get them going and get that plant out of the ground as fast as possible, as evenly as possible. So what I want to do is create everything that happens in June in warm soils. I want to trick the soil into happening in mid to late April. So 50-degree weather. And I've seen instances of where this makes a big difference because I make mistakes. The foot switch that turns all this on in a John Deere, you pull into the field, you drop the planter in, you go, and all of a sudden the monitor barks at you that it's applying nothing through the fertilizer because you forgot to hit that darn foot switch. So you got a check strip right by the road. It's awesome. Yes. So I can tell you that it makes a difference to put fertilizer on. Shocking. So in that in-furrow system runs off of these tanks here. They're just old tanks that I had someone that knows how to weld really well, build frames to hold them out underneath the markers. So I don't fill those completely up. I fill them as much as I can fill the other. I pull 50-acre loads through the sideband or the 2x2, so I put 50 acres worth of juice in the wing tanks. I really don't want this thing to be heavier than it has to be. 500 gallons out here. Ironically, those are 1979 tanks. We had a set for years and years and years. All these stainless steel tanks when we used to incorporate Treflan and Sonalan and all that in the Midwest. They went by the wayside. There's a company in Indiana that actually sells new ones. Those are not new. Those are more. The new ones are more. But I got to buy another set for a lot more money than I sold the old set a few years ago. So Yeah, Dad kind of gave me one of those eyebrow looks when he's like, "You're paying how much for tanks that we got rid of?" So we got 500 gallons out here that feeds the 2x2, and in reality, the 600 out on the planter feeds the 2x2. What I do, keep things as simple as possible. This one feeds the system. This one has a little PTO pump. I just nurse back to this one. So the tank on the planter gets down a little ways, flip the switch, magic happens. Because originally when I set this up, I was like, how am I going to get it to work off of two different heights? And I was like, why can't one nurse the other? Keep it as simple as possible. Went to farm store, bought a $200 pump, some 3/4 inch hose, and magic happens. So don't make it harder than it has to be. Going across the field, like I said, I'm just using a Keaton seed firmer. Doesn't have to be exciting. The corn doesn't care if it comes through a $25 Keaton, the fertilizer comes through a $25 Keaton or a $300 per row widget from somebody else. The corn doesn't care. Put what it needs where it needs it. And then on the sides, on both sides of the row, I'm knifing down about 2 inches the nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. So 1034O, ammonium thiosulfate, and 32%, along with some boron, along with a few other magic things. Putting all that down where it needs to be. Because what I want to happen is when those nodal roots come out, and they're always going to be about 3/4 inch below the surface, I want them to come out and go right into that band of fertilizer. So within about a day or two of them emerging from the plant, all of a sudden they've got all the groceries they need, and they grow like mad. You get that very quick, robust growth, because that's V3, that's V4. We're starting to determine kernel rows around. So if you want to stimulate 20 rows around instead of 16 or 18, make sure it's got everything it needs when those roots come out. So we end up with this. We end up with, going into 275 bushel corn, we end up with nice even stand and never had to till through there. All this residue in the middle will be gone by fall. Soil's healthy, it's sitting there, it's keeping it cooler. All sorts of good things come out of that. The other thing is, in the fall I swept the trash to the side. I don't have it buried in the row. So I never have to fight that piece of trash that's sitting in the seed zone. If I never incorporate it into the ground, I never have to worry about it hairpinning in the trench. Makes a big difference. Showed you this one yesterday. Sometimes accidents turn out to be good things. This one's got an interesting story. I alluded to this. So this was obviously early on. The story's a little bit later. So we end up with better rows around. We're then coming in and applying. We need a lot of nitrogen, 7-8 pounds per day during this area. We need 150 pounds to be ready for uptake during this time period from about V6, V7 up until tasseling. So you better have everything you need right then, right there. So I'll come in at V4, V5 and side dress so that I can have a rain in the next few days to incorporate it into the ground and have it right there in the root zone. So at that point in time, my side dress, I'm putting the balance, which is usually 3/4 of my nitrogen, roughly. It'll be the balance of my sulfur. Wrong pile. So nitrogen, sulfur, some micronutrients if I'm short, if tissue tests are telling me I need something. If you think about boron, boron is not mobile in the plant. So if I foliar apply it, it's very efficient at getting boron into the plant. Problem is it doesn't move from this leaf to the new leaf. It doesn't remobilize within the plant. So you're going to have to do several applications throughout the year if you're going to foliar apply that. I'd rather not make more applications. They cost money. I no longer have a tall sprayer. I've got a pull type sprayer now. So I can't get out there and tall corn. So what I'm doing is I'm putting it at the base of the plant, and it will go up into the plant via the roots very, very evenly and uniformly throughout the cycle of the plant. So a lot of these things that are not mobile within the plant, put them in the root zone. Zinc is another example. It's not mobile in the plant very well, and it's not mobile in the soil very well. Put it on with the planter right here. It's going to get up in there. If you have certain products, in the Midwest we've got a product from Mosaic called Mez. It's got zinc in it. It's a dry fertilizer. It's a MAP product, so monoammonium phosphate. It's got zinc embedded in each granule. I put it down here. It can provide part of what I need. So putting it on in the plant or right alongside the row, so it's going to be in the root ball as we go forward, and that will easily feed the plant as it grows through the year. I said not everything goes well. Sometimes when you plan on side dressing, it rains a lot, and that's the biggest fear that people have doing a lot of side dressing in the Midwest. If we get a 3-inch rain and it's too muddy to get in there, the corn's going to grow. I don't have anything on. I had 800 acres that had to be flown on by this guy. That basket, he's on the stick, and you guys may do this more than we do. He's on the stick all day. The only time he lands is to refuel. So he comes in, he sets the basket on the ground, they put urea and micros in it. He goes and he can fly almost the length of the field, but not quite. This was a mile-long rows. He can make a one pass, but not quite to the end of the field. He's got to come back and fill up. He did 800 acres that way. That guy earned his money. It was $24 an acre for him to fly it on. After I saw this, it was really cool. So the other thing, you're not supposed to fly drones near aircraft. A friend of mine is a drone enthusiast, and we actually talked to the helicopter guy, and we said, okay, can we fly and take pictures of you flying this on? He said, yes, be over here. We communicated with him. We got the images. He's like, as long as I can have them for marketing. Tear it up, dude. So you can actually see the pattern going across there of him going out there. You have to have a plan B. If your plan A doesn't work out, if you can't plant until June 3rd, don't plant your full season corn on June 3rd. It takes more heat to get to the finish line, and you're not going to make it necessarily. Be willing to adjust. The important thing is all these applications that we made in the past were $158 an acre if I use custom rates. So I got to use something apples to apples, so I use custom rates to judge what my costs are. If I hire it all done, that's what it costs. If I get it down to these 4 passes, which are actually placing it more where the crop needs it, I'm down to 116. So I'm $40, if I do the math right, yeah, $40 cheaper and doing a better job with less capital equipment. But every one of those applications is a smart application. So I'm the guy, because I'm a little anal with things, I'm the guy that has to be in the seat most of the time. So you have to have someone qualified to run the seat. So you can't just have the retired guy run some of these operations unless they're really good. But the big thing is, so it's cheaper. It's $40 an acre cheaper to take those yellow applications that I used to make and squeeze them into these yellow applications on the right. Some of them are new. Strip till wasn't done in the past. Some of them are existing. I'm bolting tanks onto the planter. I didn't do that in the past. And a lot of people say, well, that costs more to run a planter with fertilizer than it does without. Yes, but it's not that much more. Once I have the purchase of the tanks and have them accounted for in the cost, it's not that much more. I got to stop every 50 acres. I drink enough coffee, I need to stop every 50 acres anyway. A lot of people always say, what does it look like apples to apples? What does it look like side by side yield-wise? So this was 2018. I was going to do it in 19. That field didn't get planted. This trial for 2019 had wheat grown on it. If we look at the yield, on the left, what we have is fall strips. So I'm taking my P and K and I'm applying it in strip till, versus on the right, I spread it with a spreader just as normal. Then you have the red bars where I put I spoon-fed everything with the planter, the in furrow, the 2x2. I came back and I side dressed, so it's as It's Matt's way of farming, the way I want to be good at. Right next to it with the orange bar in the middle, I suppose, instead of the planter fertilizer, I blew it on with the sprayer. Same stuff. I didn't want it, I'm like, okay, application only. Mix up the same stuff in the sprayer, go out and spray it on those strips. And then on the right, we broadcast all the stuff that went on the planter, and we also pre-plant applied all the nitrogen instead of side dressing. So you have all the permutations of this. And on the right, you did the same thing. Now you'll notice that I can spread and I can broadcast in 2018 all the stuff that was on the planter, but as long as I side dress, I'm not bad off. This bar is within noise of these two bars. So did it, okay, yield-wise, it's fairly similar. So it's not worth it. Wrong. If I look at income on those same treatments with those yields and account for all the passes that have to be made to make those applications, all of a sudden, it's $43 an acre more expensive to grow the same gross income. So I'm not able to net what I can net doing it another way. Yield's one thing. We want to be as good as we can at that, but we got to do it for as little as possible or as efficiently as possible. I'm willing to spend money, but I better get money back. So if you look at it that way, so there's a time and equipment savings as far as capital and number of passes going across the field and labor and all that. There's also no harm done on yield. I would say they're very similar in 2018. Now, if I peel out other years where I've done kind of the same trial, certain years placement with the P&K makes a difference of the dry fertilizer. Certain years, the planter makes a difference. In 2018, everything came out of the ground very easily. That's why putting in furrow didn't matter. If we'd have had cold conditions immediately following that, if it had been poor emergence conditions, the planter fertilizer would have made a difference. If you can tell me next year in 2020 what it's going to be like the 10 days following the planting, I'll make the decision whether or not to pull that fertilizer out of the furrow. But I would guarantee you that you do get a little drier corn. If we're looking at grain, I'm drying less when I have in furrow, usually a point. That amounts to money. It's about 1% faster. Gets out of the ground a little faster, gets the race going a little faster, and you end up with a point less moisture at the end of in the fall. So that alone amounts to $4 or $5 an acre on this kind of yields. So it does work. I showed you this video yesterday. That area right there typically was not pulling those kind of yields. And it's nothing special. It's a straight Roundup corn. It's $11.97, in case you're wondering. You got a Pioneer jacket on. But I was able to do this, and we went through a significant dry period. We went through 6 weeks of drought in July and August. And I was still able to do that. And so it's not me messing with the hydro and the combine to mess with the yield monitor. You can't do it and make it happen that long. Spoon feeding on poorer soils or poorer test soils will make a difference. Dr. Mulvaney talked about it wasn't the best soils that needed a bunch of fertilizer, it was the poor soils. This is an example of that. Now I'll tell you that the best soils, they sometimes benefit from good stuff too. But the poor soils really need it. So this is that field. I was proud to be on the left. A little bit later, I'm still proud to be on the left. Oops. That's me opening up the field. There is the property line. He's standing, I'm not. You can push a field too hard for its abilities. I pushed this one a little bit too hard. We went through that 6 weeks of drought. It ran out of moisture. It wasn't able to get potash into the plant, and it cannibalized itself. And then when the rain came, the wind came with it. It was half milk line when it went down. I was this close to making it. I had it. I'd watched the field. I was like, oh gosh, these stalks are getting spongy. And then that front came in, and it was a narrow wind band, but it got me. Not every failure is a bad failure. It went down at half milk line. It was still 270, 280 bushel corn. It wasn't a complete failure, but it did. I left something on the table. I shouldn't have pushed it as hard as I did. You learn things through your failures, and then you move on. Don't sit there and this was another field, 2018. I was kind of cool, kind of amazed by this. You see these numbers pop up on this dry amount of bushels running through the yield monitor. The next thing you do is you look over at the throughput per hour. And then you start doing math of the clean grain elevator going into the tank. And then you pull back on the stick because you know that that thing blows apart at 6,000 bushels an hour and you're at 6,500. You're like, oh, we're not going to replace all that. So the artifact of some of this high yield stuff is you have to learn how to do things that you didn't do before. Drive slow is one thing. Have grain carts running next to you at all times. Occasionally you like to run through the field, at least Midwestern, grain cart unloads you, and then you're just sitting there relaxing, taking it all in. When you get to yields that are in the 3s and touching 4s, you've got a grain cart sitting there at all times. And so rather than go to more combines, a couple of years ago I went to more grain carts. I went to 2 instead of 1 because I wanted to keep the combine moving. It's $150 an hour to have the combine sitting on the end of the field idling waiting for a grain cart. It's $50 an hour to have a tractor running out there. I'd rather have another tractor running out there, and if he sits, no, not as big of a penalty as it is for this one. So look at everything. Now when I did that, now on my operation I needed another tractor. I needed one to do some tillage or strip till in the fall, and I needed 2 on grain carts at the same time. I only had 2, and I don't like to have more equipment than I needed. So at that point in time, I sold the self-propelled sprayer. Everybody strives to have a self-propelled sprayer. They think they can do it all themselves and do it the best. If I went back to a pull-type sprayer, I could then pull the sprayer, pull the side dress bar, and pull a grain cart with a piece of equipment and use it 9 months out of the year. Self-propelled sprayer, spring, summer, and then it was useless in the fall. So I had to look at asset utilization more, and so I went backwards, and in many folks' eyes, I still can have a 120-foot sprayer. I can still spray a lot. It's just not as cool, and nobody brings out the band to march me down the road. But the band doesn't really make you more money. So all of the things that we do, step back for a minute and make sure there isn't ego cost to everything that you do. The corn doesn't care. Pay attention, listen to the corn, and say, does this make me more bushels? Or does it reduce some other cost that makes the same bushels? And that's what you need to use as your final litmus test of whether or not you're going to make it. Whatever you're doing, and I like quotes. Just caught this one on a Van Trump report one morning. What you do today is important. There is no days to be wasted. You don't know how many you're going to get. Time's more valuable than money. Make hay when the sun shines. That's all I got to say. 2019 was horrible, but it had some good moments. Those are all pictures from 2019. You heard about the polar vortex last January in the Midwest? Actual temperature, negative 28 degrees Fahrenheit. It was cold. It was horrible. But it was pretty-ish. So with that, questions, thoughts, ambitions, dreams, desires. Otherwise, I appreciate the time and the opportunity.